2022 Results and Outlook webinar. My name is Greg Slade. I'm Investor Relations Consultant to Phosflow. Shortly I will hand over to CEO Lachlan McKinnon and CFO Matthew Parker to take you through a presentation. At the conclusion of the presentation, I will return to ask both Lachie and Matt a series of questions that were submitted by shareholders and other interested parties as part of the registration process for this webinar. I will also monitor the Q&A text box at the bottom of your screen for any questions that are submitted while both Lachie and Matt are speaking this morning. Now, without any further ado, I'll hand over to CEO Lachlan McKinnon.
Thanks, Greg. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the webinar. Thanks for joining us. We have a few topics to cover today. Obviously, we'll have a look at 2022, the financial year 2022 in review, looking at financials, key impacts on the business, both financial and other. We'll have a review of the legacy issues we're dealing with. We'll talk about the distribution and commercial components of the business, as that's an important platform on which we're building. We'll have a look through the project summary page and discuss that, talk a little bit more about the opportunity with Phosflow, and we'll also touch on R&D and manufacturing updates through the financial year 2022. And then we'll finish with some commentary about the 2023 outlook and on to the future of the business. So I'll now hand over to our CFO, Matt Parker, to just talk through some of the financial numbers. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Lachie, and good morning, everybody. 2022 was a period of reset and restructure in most key geographies. Revenue for the year was 3 million. It was down 52% on the 6.3 generated in 2021. We need to remember, though, that 2021 revenues were positively impacted by the Kralingsa Plus application. The business did continue to face headwinds in 2022 as a result of project delays and the continued priority by government authorities in managing the COVID-related health initiatives, particularly in China. Gross profit was 1.4 million for the full year. It was down 6.1% on the prior period. The margin, gross profit margin, was 45%, was down on 2021 as a result of higher freight costs, which I'm sure everybody understands and everybody knows. But it was partially offset by favourable pricing and slightly lower project application costs, particularly in Kralingsa, that I mentioned previously. Underlying EBIT for 2022 was a loss of 9.1 million compared to a loss of 7.9 million in 2021. Lower sales revenue, as I mentioned before, flowing to gross margin and higher operating costs contributed to that result. The operating expenses were higher in the reporting period, as I mentioned. This is as a result of expenditure on restructuring costs in China, ongoing legal and consulting expenses, government lobbying to enable product registration in Canada, and we did allocate resources to the company's manufacturing supply chain strategy that Lachie mentioned throughout the year. NPAT for the group for the full year amounted to a loss of 11.2 million. A key explanation for that result versus prior period in that 2021 did include a favourable non-recurring non-cash gain on lease liabilities of about 3.3 million. And that was as a result of us modifying the leases and reducing our footprint in China in particular. Moving to operating cash flow for the full year was a cash outflow of 7 million. Cash payments to customers for the year was 5.1 million compared to 8.8 million in 2021. The big difference there is obviously Kralingsa, as I mentioned, as a variance. Payments to supplier employees for the full year were 13.5 million. Receipts from customers came primarily from the settlement of BHZQ in China and KQB, or KQB as we refer it, in China also, which after a very protracted legal negotiation, they did agree to partially pay the majority of outstanding before the new year, and they did pay the balance in January, quite recently. The cash outflow relates primarily to employee payments as a result of the aforementioned restructure in China ongoing legal and consulting fees, and resources allocated to government lobbying in Canada. And we did do capital works in China, which I think Lockie will mention in the presentation. So with that, thank you to all, and I'll hand back to Lockie to take you through the remainder of the presentation.
Thanks, Matt. And as Matt has just described, financial year 2022 was a disappointing year for us, all things considered. We saw a number of challenges for the business in terms of slow sales as global economies took time to recover and turn attention back to environmental issues, no doubt still impacted by COVID issues. And as we know, China was specifically the lag from COVID impacts was quite late until the end of 2022. The company is in a rebuilding phase. We're rebuilding on a new distribution model, which I'll touch on, and additional product platforms. And obviously that is taking some time. We have some ongoing legacy issues, which still cost time and money. We are reducing as much as we can the expense on those, but everyone should note that those issues still need addressing. On a more positive footing, Brazil performed very well throughout FY 2022, and that growth is expected to continue in the future years. We launched Phosflow in the second half of 2022, which opens new market segments, not only just for Phosflow, but for Phoslock itself as we move into different segments of the water treatment markets. Our distribution platforms are largely in place, and I'll talk some more about that in a moment, and that strategy is delivering results. We made some key appointments of personnel in a number of geographies around the world throughout the year. As I mentioned, we identified and actually commercialized some of the new segments in the water treatment markets, so that was very pleasing. The project pipeline continues to build. I'll discuss that a little more as well. And of course, we relisted on the ASX in September 2022. And just a bit of a call out to Matt, and thanks for all the effort that he put in to make that happen. It was a significant amount of work, as everyone knows. Thank you. So just updating on the legacy issues. I know many of you want to hear us talking about forward, not backward, but as I mentioned just then, we still do have to deal with a number of issues, so it's important that we update you on them. Internal reviews have largely been completed for all staff, suppliers, and agents, with a number of training exercises undertaken throughout the year. We have new systems and processes implemented to strengthen risk management and governance. Matt touched on the outstanding receivables were pursued with success with the KQB receivable, which did involve quite a protracted legal negotiation or legal process, I guess. Jinwan, unfortunately, after winning the court order, we have not received payment for that receivable. So that continues to be pursued with all vigour, as you would expect, and we'll keep updating you as we go with any action out of that particular receivable. We also restructured the China business completely throughout the year, particularly the latter part of the year with the distribution-focused sales model, which has a number of effects which we've touched on before. Certainly decreases risk, particularly around receivable, as we've just discussed. It's a significant cost saving as we've moved to a distribution model which involves less direct sales people. We also achieved the relisting in September, as I mentioned, on the ASX. We continue our cooperation with regulators in a number of areas which we've previously talked about. And we've also previously mentioned any legal proceedings with individuals or against individuals will be reviewed after those regulatory investigations are completed, which is an important point for some of you ask me about reasonably regularly. Thank you. If we just talk the distribution business model for a minute, I really would call this more a commercial business model discussion. But as you know, the previous focus of the business was largely on large lakes. And as we know, they can be quite lumpy and reasonably hard to predict. So we've changed the focus, or we've added to the focus of our commercial strategy, our go-to-market strategy, of a distribution model, which fundamentally means we have agreements with partners in various parts of the world, geographies, that where they're connected with their agents and their lakes and their models, and they can get us into smaller, more repeatable water treatments much quicker and as I said, much easier. So that's been a key component of the focus, and I'm pleased to say we've already seen sales from the US and Europe and Australia and New Zealand through this model. So the strategy is working. The securing of Phosflow allows us to open up new market segments as well through this distribution model, through the flowable water remediation access, and it enables our sales guys in the US and Europe and here in Australia and New Zealand particularly to focus on those larger lake projects, which of course are still very important to us, and very important that we turn those opportunities into contracts, as I'll talk about in a little bit more detail. So that's a very important component of the business and of the strategy, and pleased to report that it is starting to show results already. Thanks. If we look at what we've done with the distribution network around the world, so firstly in the US, multiple agreements are in place with retail and water application companies. Most of the companies we're dealing with in the US are involved in aquatic product supply. So they're already in this space. They may sell to applicators, or they may sell directly to the water body involved. But either way, as I said, this gives us much quicker, repeatable access to these water bodies. Also in the US, a number of these distributors are involved in large lake applications, and it gives us the opportunity to work with them or work on our own directly with these larger lakes. And a number of opportunities have already come through on the larger lakes through this distribution platform. So that's very pleasing. In Europe, again, we've mentioned a number of these agreements. We have we have agreements with retail and application specialists, SSI in the UK. I'm sure some of you have looked them up. They're a significant player in the water space in the UK. Aquatic Solutions as well. IM Data in the Netherlands and Belgium, and Unicoi in Germany. All distribution agreements in place. And we have more discussions ongoing in the UK, Netherlands, Ireland, and Switzerland for further agreements. In China, we've identified 5 key regions. I have talked about this before, but I'll just reinforce it. 5 key regions with a number of distributors in each, and those contracts are under negotiation as we speak. South America, Brazil, Hydroscience, you're well aware of those, or that distribution agreement or licensee agreement, highly successful for us and continues to build the business there. And we've appointed, or we did appoint last year, a distribution agent in Uruguay, Frescos Fritales. And while we haven't seen any direct business yet, there is a reasonable project that we expect will happen very soon. In Australia and New Zealand, not as formal agreements in place, but we have a number of partners both here and in New Zealand. So that's a bit of an update on the distribution program and platform around the world. Thank you. If we now move to just a general regional update, both what happened in FY 2022 and some of the future looking opportunities for in the geographies. So starting with Canada in the top left of your screen, we still see significant interest in Phoslow in Canada, and with a number of projects on pause pending the resolution of the regulatory issues that we've discussed previously. We have made some progress in this area, albeit slow. We have had a number of discussions with the regulators that are involved in the Canadian registration, and while we're making progress, as I said, we have to point out that it is slow, and I expect it to still take some time. However, the board and all senior management has identified Canada as a significant opportunity for us, and we should continue to pursue this registration in Canada. In the US, I touched on the distribution expansion, which is well with orders received towards the end of 2022 and again early in 2023. We did enhance the US team with a couple of appointments through 2022, which has been terrific, and again already showing some results for us in that part of the world. A number of larger lake opportunities have been engaged and are being developed in the US on the back of the appointment of these people and the engagement with distribution in New Jersey, in Washington State, and in Florida. So we'll keep you updated as how those projects progress. In Europe, we did two further smaller treatments around the Keringsleplas in Rotterdam. We monitored the Keringsleplas throughout the year with exceptionally good results throughout the year, which is very important because it sets up other potential applications in Europe with a lot of focus on the Rotterdam project. And so we're pleased to say we have a number of projects that we're hopeful to complete through 2023, and possibly that will be spring in 2023. It should really say hopefully complete rather than finalised, because they've still got some work to do, but they're in the UK, the Netherlands, and in Finland. And we obviously have the potential to roll out other lakes, particularly in Finland and the Netherlands, as a consequence of what we've been able to achieve in Rotterdam. The distribution platform, as I said, is progressing well, and we have a number of trials across a number of regions going on to test Phosflow in a whole lot of different segments than we've ever really operated in before. So, but particularly wastewater, both domestic or domestic utility and agricultural. Quite exciting opportunities look like they're being developed through the European network. In South America, I've already mentioned Brazil had an outstanding year last year for us. Continue to treat a number of projects annually, but also developing new projects and new opportunities. So that particular country does very well for us under the stewardship of Hydroscience. We're seeing opportunities develop, as I mentioned, in Uruguay and in Ecuador in shrimp farming. So again, they're in the projects page, and they're projects and opportunities under development. In China, I mentioned already, the business has been restructured and reset. We've overhauled the manufacturing plant in Shanjing and our channels to market. We identified the distributors, as I've already mentioned, in the 5 key regions. We do expect a significant uplift in the economy in China as a result of the COVID controls ending in the latter part of 2022. We do expect that to have some positive flow into our business as the Chinese economy and the businesses in China start to get going again after some pretty significant lockdowns, which we all know. In Australia, through FY 2022, we completed works in WA and in Queensland. We also did a treatment in Auckland in October 2022 with outstanding results in the Chelsea ponds, which are at a sugar refinery mill right in the centre, or not in the centre, but very close to the centre of Auckland. Outstanding results. However, we do operate in a natural environment, and as you know, Auckland earlier this year had massive floods, and that has impacted that water body, which is obviously a concern now as we have to manage, and the managers of the water body have to address what's happened through that flooding. So that's just what happens in a natural environment that we work. There are a number of projects being developed in both countries. New Zealand distributors and agents are helping us in that part of the world, and here in Australia, similar, with both new segments being opened for Phosflow, but also for Phoslock, and our first sales into the mining industry occurred earlier this year, which again is a new segment for us, but nevertheless exciting, and we hope will grow into obviously bigger and better opportunities as we go forward. Thank you. So this is the page from the website. Hopefully you're all reasonably familiar with it. It's our opportunities page, if you'd like to call it that, or our open projects page. It comes with the caveat, and I need to say it, that they're not guaranteed. These are projects and opportunities that we're working on. There's many of them, and they grow in number pretty regularly. The trick for us, or the key focus for us, is to convert these opportunities into sales, and that's the key focus of the sales team. But as you know, many impacts and many variables occur which either delay these, and that's typically what happens, delay them, or sometimes they drop off. So sometimes, and I have had feedback that some of the projects don't seem to have moved much in terms of time, and I understand that, but that's the nature of the business. Some of these projects can take some time to get from start to contract signing or application, and obviously we advise as much as we can about what's happening, but I hope you understand some of these can take time, and we will update this every month so that you're informed of any significant progress that happens through these. But there's a number there with over 70 projects around the world, and you can see where they are. I'm certainly not going to go into each one of them, but you have a good geographic spread of many projects and opportunities, and we'll keep these updated, and I hope you can get a chance to have a look at them on the website as we go. Thank you. I did want to touch on Phosflow for many reasons, but significantly for us, it was a key focus of our R&D efforts of the last few years, was to have a flowing water product for phosphorus capture. So we achieved that with the agreement with the Water Warriors in the US, which is an exceptionally good relationship that we're working with those guys with. But Phosflow brings not only opportunities in itself, but it opens up new opportunities for Phoslock. And that's some of these new segments that we're talking to and involved with as a result of talking to them about Phosflow. So it's a really important component of our strategy and of our business. There is work to do. It's going to take some commercial effort and trial work and proving of concepts to meet all the markets that we hope to. But the potential for Phosflow and the knock-on potential to Phoslock is significant for the business. And I wanted to just to reinforce that. The last point there is that it's potentially can be used as a slow release fertilizer, which again is a really exciting opportunity, and one that gets customers, when we talk to them, very enthused about having something that has such a good environmental profile. There is some work to do to understand exactly how best to use it as a slow release fertilizer, but that is certainly part of our ongoing strategy. Thank you. just to give you a little more flavour on Phosflow and the opportunity we see, and I don't necessarily need to go through all of these, but you can see, most importantly, the different segments that we're operating in. So wastewater from domestic and commercial, we haven't been operating in that space before, but I was lucky enough to be in Europe a couple of weeks ago, in the UK, and we had some terrific meetings with people involved in wastewater, both at a commercial level and let's say at an industrial level. Municipal treatment plants, for example. We're talking to people in agriculture, particularly dairy runoff. For those of you who would understand, that's a significant issue. Recreational water, swimming pond applications, and landfill leaching, which is actually something we're doing across many geographies, including Australia. So there's lots of different segments that we're talking to, both in Europe and the US, that are all good potential for this product. And as I mentioned earlier, often that leads into the knock-on effect of being a good potential market for Phoslock, pending on what the application is. We're also seeing Phosflow and some of the meetings we've had with lake managers around Phosflow, particularly in the US, leading to Phoslock opportunities. So I'm hoping you're getting the feeling of how these two products work together and how a total solution for phosphorus capture in both flowing and still water is what we've been aiming for and now what we have. So in the ANZ region, we've also looked at mining, municipal waterways and inflows, landfill again, and fish farming. So there's multiple segments that are opening up as a consequence of these projects. We achieved some moderate or modest, I think is the right word, sales at the end of last year and early into this year, obviously expecting those sales to build throughout 2023 and beyond. Thank you. So just changing gears here a little bit, update on the manufacturing and supply chain piece. We spent about $360,000 so far and expected $640,000 to upgrade the Chinese facility to get it to a capacity of 6,000 tonnes. We previously advised that might be closer to $1 million, so that's come in under budget or under expectations, which is obviously which is pleasing, and that is completed, and now that production facility is at a level we would expect of the business and a capacity of 6,000 tonnes. The Jinwan Lake project, which I touched on the receivable, but shareholders and stakeholders should note that we also received just over 1,000 tonnes of our stock that was returned throughout 2022, which was very important, obviously, and that is returned and is safely now in the warehouses of ours in Shanjing. We also have previously advised, and just to update you on the potential second manufacturing production plant in the US, which we identified a site in Casper in Wyoming. And during 2022, we began and completed what you would call the initial phases of design work. So that was done. We have discussions ongoing between the Wyoming Business Council, the state government of Wyoming, and Advanced Casper, who are like partners and promoters of business in Casper, who've been very helpful to us. But there's discussions ongoing about various government support packages and grants that are available, and I know some shareholders have seen this. Those discussions are ongoing. Obviously, we'll advise if there are favourable outcomes for those and what they mean. But if you see discussions, that's what they are. They're discussions going on between various government entities about potential grants, etc. We've paused the Casper project, as we've said previously, based on development of acceptable business case, which of course would be based on increased volume demand and sales. So we continue to work on that business case and we'll obviously advise as we go. sales and operations planning processes implemented in the business now. So we have a good forecasting and demand forecasting process, and obviously trying to drive supply chain efficiencies through those processes. Thank you. In R&D, our focus is really twofold. On the right-hand side of the slide, a heavy focus on Phosflow and all the various validations and field trials we're doing in a number of new segments, which is critical for the growth and development of Phosflow. So that's a very important component of our R&D efforts throughout 2022, and will continue into 2023. And we're focusing now into nitrogen, looking for potential products that can help us remove nitrogen. It's more complicated due to some science and technical things we don't need to get into, but we've engaged work with the Water Warriors and the US EPA and a PhD project here in Melbourne with Monash, which will commence in the first half of 23, exploring those opportunities for nitrogen capture. We're also looking at different uses of Phoslock and different combinations of Phoslock, which we think is really important, particularly around the ease of use of Phoslock, but also around some of the other combinations that can be used in treatment of the problems in lakes. We want to advise that we're not continuing with ZEEP. We have been assessing the performance of ZEEP, and it hasn't met our expectations or requirements, so that work will discontinue. And we continue to test some other technologies around absorption of nutrients from wastewater in various geographies. So that's the focus of the R&D of the group. Thank you. I think this is the last slide, so thank you very much for that. Our outlook slide, FY 2023 expectations. So we do expect 23 to be another challenging year as we rebuild the pipeline, as we continue to execute the growth and diversification of our market segments, but of that strategy. We do expect positive sales growth through the year, with the US and Europe being the major drivers. We do expect some legacy issues and costs to continue throughout 2023. We are budgeting to make a loss and continued cash burn through FY 2023, which may continue, potentially could continue into FY 24. The key focus areas of the business and the senior management and board of the business, so enhancing and executing of the strategy. As I mentioned earlier, conversion of the projects in our pipeline into genuine contracts and sales, and that's a very, very important and key focus of the sales team in all the major regions. We have engaged corporate advisors to look at all options for the business and to look at realising the maximum shareholder value we can. So we're also doing the Canadian regulatory work, our R&D work that I talked about, developed in the identified areas I just mentioned, secure the manufacturing efficiencies and supply chain efficiencies, as I discussed, and the litigation and legacy issues managed and obviously, where possible, concluded. The confidence basis for the business, for the future of the business, we are operating in a large and growing market. We have a large pipeline of opportunities, which is increasing. Our distribution strategy is working. Our applications, without fail, are highly successful, and the customer feedback is exceptionally positive to every application we do. And the company at the end of last year, 31 December 22, had 14.5 million in cash. So with that, Greg, I will hand it back to you, and Matt and I can try and handle any or answer any questions that come forward.
Thanks, Lockie. Now, we did have some questions that came in as part of the registration process for the webinar, which we'll go through now. So first of all, what's the status of the $7 million we're owed from the Jinwan Lake project in China? Notwithstanding the Chinese court order for Phoslow to be paid in full, what's the prospect of us receiving at least some of what we're owed?
Yeah, that's a good question. We touched on it, or I touched on it briefly, so did Matt, I believe. As I said, we were granted the court order. We talked about it at the time. There was no dispute with the Jinwan Lake people. And the court order was for payment, including interest, I think it was around the middle of October of 2022. Unfortunately, nothing has come through despite multiple conversations, I'll say many promises of money coming through, albeit not the full amount ever, was discussed by them, but they did commit to some degree to be paying. Now, we haven't seen any of that. So we continue to engage with the authorities. We continue to look for all avenues and different avenues, if I might call them those, to receive this payment. Most recently, we wrote a letter, or I wrote a letter to the Yuchi government, which is the Yuchi mayor. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. The mayor of the Yuchi city, which is the city responsible for the Jinwan Lake application and payments. I haven't had a response yet, but obviously we will continue to do everything we can. It's a very important component for us of the business and our cash and cash flow. So we'll continue to advise shareholders as we proceed. It obviously remains a high priority, extremely frustrating, as you can imagine, for both us and I'm sure shareholders and everyone involved. And this is despite what you would call good conversations with the group. Nothing has come forward at this point. Okay.
You've stated that another loss is expected in 2023 while we continue to rebuild the sales pipeline. No more specific guidance has been given, but can you comment if you expect the loss and associated cash burn to be higher or lower than in 2022?
Right. So based on our projected sales and costs, we are budgeting for a loss in FY 2023, as I stated. The loss is expected to be lower than FY 2022. However, we should note that these numbers can change both ways, pending completion and timing of projects. We should also note, Greg, that and listeners, that we are weighted to the second half of the year, which does have higher projected sales than the first, largely because of the Northern Hemisphere activity, as would understand. So that's the situation.
Okay, the next question is, could you comment on the patent status of Phoslow in the various jurisdictions we operate in around the globe? And following on from that, do you think the Phoslow product will eventually be approved by Canadian regulators? Because that has been taking a while.
Okay. Right, they're slightly different sort of questions, but as we've said before, we have patents granted in certain countries around the world and patents in process in others. We continue to do whatever we can to protect those patents that are in process in a number of the countries, and that is for both Phoslow and Phosflow. It should be noted that some countries, and you can probably imagine which, are harder than others. Obviously, China is one that is harder, and I guess somewhat questionable about what it would mean anyway. So But we are very attentive to it. We engage with legal advisors around our processes and our patents and our patents in process pretty regularly to make sure we're doing all we can to uphold those. We of course will defend wherever we have to, and we have done recently in both the US and in China, and we'll continue to do so as we need. But that, yeah, as I say, that's the current status. Oh, and Canada, sorry. Yeah, so as I touched on, we believe firstly that Canada is a significant market opportunity for us. There's a lot of talk in Canada around the environment and things like methane reduction and various water treatment opportunities. And so we continue to believe that it is worth pursuing what is a reasonably frustrating and I guess somewhat costly process to get this registration in place. In the latter half of 2022, we had some, I'd say, positive discussions with the authorities in Canada regarding the status of the registration. But I would caution by saying they were positive discussions. There is still significant work to do. We continue to do that. We engage various scientists from around the world to help us in this activity. We engage various environmentalists around the world to help us talk to the Canadian government, and we obviously engage with Canadian government, even though, Canadian government members who clearly have a desire to see their lakes and waterways cleaned up. So we're making progress. It's slow. Anything of significance, of course, we would advise the market of, and we continue to work on this because we believe the market opportunity is worth pursuing.
Okay, just moving on to Phosflow now. Could Phosflow end up being a larger, end up being larger than Phoslock, given its broader range of applications in flowing water environments, larger as in terms of sales?
That's an interesting question, isn't it? I don't want to predict whether it'd be larger or not. What I would say is that it's a very exciting opportunity, and the reason that we're excited is multi-layered, if you like. It's exciting because it's a product that treats phosphorus in flowing water, which was a key component of our R&D efforts. So we identified early days that we needed something in flowing water. But not only that, it gives us a conversation with customers that is slightly different. And I think I've said to stakeholders in the past that sometimes when you're talking about Phoslock, a customer will go to the obvious question, well, what do I do about the inflow pollutants of phosphorus and so on? And in the past, we couldn't really help with that, but now we can. So we talk to customers now about a total solution of phosphorus, and that's really important. And of course, it's opening up new segments as I tried to talk about through the presentation. So I think if you look at all of that in context, it's really a great opportunity for the business. And then if you added in the future things like nitrogen capture, then obviously you've got almost a complete water remediation tools product range, that would be really great. So I don't want to predict what will be bigger than which will be bigger or which won't. We're obviously very focused on both products, and we really like the synergy that comes from having both Phosflow and Phoslock in the portfolio.
Okay, on the second last slide regarding nitrogen pollution removal, could you give us a bit more colour on the potential opportunity for moving into nitrogen in addition to phosphorus removal?
Yeah, sure. So I think most of our listeners would understand that phosphorus and nitrogen are the two biggest pollutants typically found in in freshwater eutrophic lakes or freshwater challenged lakes and rivers and systems. We have a great solution for phosphorus now, as everyone would know, but we don't have nitrogen. Now, phosphorus is the bigger problem, and you'll see if you get a chance, anyone who's listening, to have a look at our phosphorus future produced out of the UK, you'll see an extraordinary amount of work and scientific scientific work, I guess, that's gone into phosphorus and what we need to do. The UK itself is an extremely busy and engaged promoter of managing phosphorus, not only as a pollutant, but as a fertilizer and how it's used. So phosphorus is the bigger opportunity, but some countries have nitrogen problems that are larger than phosphorus. So the opportunity for nitrogen is big as well. And of course, for us, Greg, to the question, having that completion of the two biggest nutrient problems in our portfolio would be significant. So that's and very important, because it makes that conversation with the customer obviously even stronger. So I hope that gives a bit of colour to it. Yeah, I mean, it's a focus for our R&D efforts. It is a harder nutrient to remove to remove because, you know, of the chemistry involved and the different forms of nitrogen that can be in a water body. So it's not, it's by no means just pick products off the shelf kind of thing. There's a bit of work that has to go in, which is actually good, because it means it'll be technology that is novel and technology hopefully that is defendable and potentially patentable. So that's why we're focusing on nitrogen in our R&D efforts.
Okay, thanks, Lockie. Well, that concludes the questions. I can see a couple of line item specific questions in the Q&A box. We might take those ones offline. I'll get back to you, or Matthew will. And that's all we have time for this morning. And I'd really like to thank everyone for their attendance and interest in Phoslow. And we'll keep you updated on a regular basis as we move forward. Thank you very much for your attendance. Good morning.
Thank you.